Have you ever heard the saying, "We often meet our destiny on the road we take to avoid it"? Well, there's no story that proves this more than the tragedy of Fenrir, the great wolf of Norse mythology. It's a tale of destiny, betrayal, and how the gods' own fear created the very monster they believed would destroy them. Our story begins with a dark prophecy, whispered by a Volva, Osiris, to Odin, the allfather of the Aesir gods. She spoke of the children of Loki, the trickster god, and foretold a grim future. One of his sons, a wolf, would one day bring about the death of Odin himself during the final battle of Ragnarok. From his jaws, she warned, will come the death of the Allfather. This prophecy planted a seed of dread in the heart of Asgard. So when Loki's children were brought before the gods, they were viewed not as individuals, but as ticking time bombs. The great serpent Jormungandr was cast into the sea. The half-dead goddess Hel was sent to rule the underworld. But the third child, a tiny, beautiful wolf pup named Fenrir, was different. He was just a pup, seemingly harmless. Odin, perhaps hoping to control the prophecy by keeping the threat close, decided that Fenrir would be raised in Asgard. In the beginning, life in the Golden City was good for the young wolf. He was a magnificent creature, with a coat like polished obsidian, and eyes that shone with a keen intelligence. Most of the gods were wary of him, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes, but one god saw past the prophecy. This was Tyr, the god of war and, more importantly, the god of justice and honor. Tyr saw not a monster, but a loyal and intelligent being. He fed Fenrir, played with him, and treated him with kindness. In return, Fenrir gave Tyr his unwavering loyalty and affection. He was more than a pet, he was a companion. But the prophecy loomed large. Fenrir grew at an astonishing rate. What was once a playful pup quickly became a colossal wolf, his head level with the tallest of the gods. His strength was immense, his intelligence unnerving. He could understand their speech, and his gaze seemed to pierce through their deceptions. The gods' initial unease blossomed into full-blown fear. They began to hold secret meetings, their voices low and urgent. He grows too strong, one would say the prophecy. We cannot ignore it, another would insist. They had raised him, nurtured him, but now they saw him only as the wolf from the Viviva's vision. Odin, obsessed with preventing his foretold demise, became deaf to any counsel that suggested fate was immutable. He was determined to change it, no matter the cost. The decision was made, Fenrir had to be bound. But how could they chain a creature they had raised as their own without revealing their fear and betrayal? They decided to disguise their treachery as a game, a test of strength. They approached Fenrir with a massive iron chain called Leyding. "Fenrir, my friend," they said, their voices dripping with false camaraderie, "we all marvel at your strength. Let us see if it is as great as we believe. Try to break this chain." Fenrir, though young, was no fool. He sensed their unease, their hidden agenda. But he also trusted them, especially Tyr, who stood among them. He wanted to prove his might, and perhaps, in his own way, to reassure them that he was no threat. He allowed them to wrap Leyding around his massive body. With a deep breath and a single, powerful flex of his muscles, the chain shattered, its links flying like shrapnel. The gods forced smiles and applauded, but their eyes were wide with terror. Their fear now doubled. They commissioned a second chain, Dromi, twice as strong as the first. Again, they presented it as a game, a greater challenge for a greater strength. They declared Fenrir was more suspicious this time. The game felt less like fun and more like a desperate attempt to contain him. Still, pride and a lingering thread of trust made him agree. He let them bind him with Dromi. He strained, his muscles bunching like mountains under his fur. For a moment, the chain held. Then, with a roar that shook the foundations of Asgard, Dromi exploded into 1,000 pieces. Now, panic gripped the gods. Their brute force was useless against him. Odin, in his desperation, sent a messenger to the dark elves of Svartalfheim, the master craftsmen of the Nine Realms. He commanded them to forge a fetter that could not be broken. The dwarves, in their subterranean forges, created a masterpiece of impossibility. They called it Gleipnir. It looked like a silken ribbon, smooth and delicate to the touch. But it was forged from 6 things that do not exist: the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. It was an unbreakable paradox, a magical chain disguised as silk. The gods took Gleipnir and sailed to a remote island called Lyngvi. They invited Fenrir for another game. But this time, when Fenrir saw the delicate ribbon, his suspicion solidified into certainty. "This is no game," he said, his voice a low growl. "There is no glory in breaking such a slender band. If there is trickery here, and I cannot free myself, I will have little help from you. I will not be bound by this ribbon." The gods taunted him, calling him a coward, afraid of a simple piece of silk. But Fenrir's wisdom was as great as his strength. He saw the fear in their eyes. He knew this was their final, desperate move. "I will agree," he finally said, his gaze sweeping over them, "but only if one of you is willing to place their hand in my mouth as a pledge of good faith. A promise that you will release me if I cannot break this ribbon." A chilling silence fell upon the gods. They looked at each other, none willing to make the sacrifice. They knew Gleipnir was unbreakable. They knew this was a one-way trip for the Volf, and a one-way ticket for whichever hand went into his jaws. And then, one god stepped forward. It was Tyr. His face was a mask of grief. He was torn between his duty to Asgard and his bond with the Volf he had raised. He was the god of honor, and this was the most dishonorable act he could imagine. But he was also a god of his people, and he believed this was necessary for their survival. With a heavy heart, he walked to Fenrir. He looked into the Volf's eyes, a silent apology passing between them, and placed his right hand into Fenrir's massive mouth, between his sharp teeth. The other gods quickly wrapped Gleipnir around Fenrir. The Volf strained. He pulled, he twisted, he thrashed with all his might. But the silken ribbon held fast. The more he struggled, the tighter it became. A triumphant cheer went up from the gods. They had done it. They had cheated fate. But their celebration was cut short by two sounds. The first was a sickening crunch as Fenrir, realizing the depth of their betrayal, bit down. Tyr screamed in agony as the Volf's jaws severed his hand at the wrist. The second sound was a howl. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and heartbreak. A howl of a creature who had loved and trusted, only to be deceived and imprisoned by those he considered family. It was a howl that echoed through all 9 realms, a promise of vengeance that would simmer for ages. The gods, all except the now one-handed Tyr, laughed at his pain. They took the end of the chain, dragged the furious Volf to a great slab of rock, and pinned him there. They then took a sword and jammed it into his mouth, forcing his jaws open, so his howls of fury became a constant, gurgling river of drool. And there they left him, bound and betrayed on a lonely island, to await the coming of Ragnarok. With every passing day, his rage grows, his power swells, and his hatred for the gods solidifies into an absolute certainty. The prophecy the gods feared so much, they themselves set in motion. They took an innocent creature, and through their fear and betrayal, they forged him into the very monster they dreaded. They didn't avert destiny, they created it. And they ensured that when the final day comes, when the chains finally break, the Volf that comes for Odin will not just be a beast of prophecy, but an engine of pure, righteous, and merciless revenge. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this dive into Norse mythology, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories from the ancient world. See you next time.